Welcome back to the Real Estate 401k Show. I'm your host, Mike Weinstein, alongside Justin Frederick and Ryan Gerdes. You're going to want to text the word homes to 623AZ Recon. That's homes to 623AZ Recon. Just a lot of changes and a lot of questions and a lot of confusion about what's going on in the real estate market and interest rates and recessions and elections coming up. But one of the topics that I keep seeing pop up, and one of the questions that a lot of our listeners have, is about inventory. And I think there's a lot of confusion about not only what is the true inventory look like, but what do inventory numbers mean and what are the most important indicators. And I've just been seeing a lot of I'm not going to call it misinformation, because it's not that it's not accurate. It doesn't mean anything. It's a bunch of bullshit. But a lot of agents and a lot of people going on Facebook and social media just talking about how we've seen a massive increase of inventory in homes. And buyers don't know, and sellers for that matter, don't know what necessarily to do with these numbers. So I wanted to clear it up, because what inventory numbers aren't necessarily what we specifically focus on. And so case in point, this morning when I looked up inventory numbers on the MLS, the Arizona Regional MLS, which is the MLS that we use, it said that we had 20,604 available properties in the MLS. And everybody goes, oh man, that's fantastic. We got a lot of inventory going on. And then why is the market doing this? But in truth, when I'm looking at inventory, because what people don't understand about our MLS is, if I am a member of Armless, but I've got a listing, let's just say in Flagstaff, I could put it on the MLS and it shows as active. That doesn't mean anything to me as a buyer who's looking for something in the Phoenix area. So what I always like to look at is single family active homes in Maricopa County and what the difference is. And the difference was staggering. So as I said, Ryan, when I looked this morning, 20,604 active properties in the MLS. But when I looked up single family dwellings in Maricopa County, it came out to be 11,402. That's a huge difference, because that's what the typical buyer is looking for. And that's the number that they need to pay attention to.
I would agree, and I'm starting to disagree with you a little bit, and that's only because we have seen so many younger first-time home buyers that do want the condo, townhouse, patio home lifestyle, which would not be a single-family residential.
Okay, so then let me just say this before you continue. So when I looked at just properties in the MLS in Maricopa County, it came out to be about 16,000.
Right, yeah, and so, but still a far cry from 20,000. But if we're thinking about numbers now versus 2021, when nothing stayed on the market longer than a few hours, we were averaging around 3,800 to 3,200, depending on the day, back then. So there's been obviously a significant increase, so about 5x what it was during the height of the real estate market, not just in Maricopa County but nationwide. And if you'll recall, if you've been following us, those were staggering low numbers. Those were
extremely low.
Those were like almost a state of emergency numbers. So and also on top of that, there was a lot of false economics going on with that market as well, just because a lot of people were paying numbers that didn't make sense, weren't necessarily worth it, et cetera, because there was a lot of FOMO going on. And so you would even see values that weren't really true. Did some of those things actually happen? Sure. But there was money that was being spent that they didn't necessarily have, wasn't necessarily worth it, et cetera. And there's tons of data to back that up. So the only other thing to really take into account is, you've heard us talking very, very recently and very often about new homes. And so if you walk into a new home builder, some of those, if it's not a spec home, that would not be involved in those numbers that we're giving you.
True.
So there's still additional inventory out there. So we are seeing we're getting pretty darn close to a balanced market. which I do like seeing. Feel like a balanced market is something that's more predictable, and that's something that that doesn't create as much chaos and doesn't create a crazy pendulum swing. But the question is how long and when does the inventory stop going up, and what does it look like when we are at a true 20,000 to 22,000, because that's kind of the balanced number. That's the balanced market number when we're looking at Maricopa County as it pertains to population growth, etc. We like to see around 20,000 for a balanced market.
Yeah, and I think when you take a look at a scale, and I think the question is, are we in a buyer's market? And if we are in a buyer's market, how come it's not acting like a buyer's market? And I would just say, when you take a look at a pendulum swing, you got a seller's market on one side and a buyer's market on one side. I would say that we are slightly on a buyer's market. And people would go, well, how could that be when inventory is it's so much higher and it's going up? And I would say because you have to take a look at homes in Maricopa County. You just can't take a look at those overall numbers. And if it was truly, I think, let's just say if it was 22,000 right now, single family homes in Maricopa County on the market, I would say we'd be in a very strong buyer's market. And I think people are a little bit confused. How come it's not a full buyer's market? And I think it's just because the inventory numbers are a little bit skewed, and we're not looking at true numbers in Maricopa County.
Well, it has the thing that we're not talking about is momentum and trends. And so when you are on an upswing towards that 20,000 let's just call 20,000 as a balanced market. As we're trending and we're having momentum moving that way, then the market is going to act more like a buyer's market. Whereas if we were at 25,000 trending down to 20,000, then people would be behaving more as like a seller's market. And so those are a couple of things that are impacting the behavior of the market. But if you're a buyer and you're looking in certain neighborhoods, you're going to quickly realize that there are some geographical pockets that are very much so a seller's market, and then some other pockets that are very much so a buyer's market. So we're kind of giving you a 30,000-foot view. And so if you are truly thinking about entering the market as a buyer or as a seller, we need to really dig in and get on the ground floor and see what's actually going on in your specific community.
And you can do that by texting the word homes to 623-AZ-RECON. That's homes to 623-AZ-RECON. Justin, on the lending side, because you're seeing the contracts, right? What are we looking at as far as when we take a look at a buyer's market and a seller's market? I think and there's many indicators to this, but one of the indicators is the amount of concessions you're seeing that sellers are willing to give up. Are they still pretty high? Or are you seeing it, tapering down, or you're not seeing as many in the way of seller concessions?
But we're still seeing a ton of seller concessions. Okay. I'm just going to emphasize this. This is in Maricopa County. My East Coast business is more so a seller's market for sure. We're going over appraised values on the East Coast, no concessions, fighting for homes, appraisal guarantees. We're out here, we're seeing, we just got a contract this morning with 3.5% seller concessions covering a buy down and a portion of the closing costs. So it's a great market to be buying out here, but I just don't think it's going to last very long.
It may not. All right, Ryan, you bring up every once in a while. I got to be like, all right, that was a brilliant point.
All right,
all right. So don't get your head all swelled or whatever the case is. But I think
I got 2 kids. They keep me humble, dude.
Yeah.
And a wife.
The wife
who keeps you in line.
Yeah.
But I think that is, we do it all the time. I just don't know if we've necessarily ever have articulated it on the show. Of when a buyer texts the word homes to 623-AZ-RECON, we can't just take a look at the overall MLS numbers, because at the end of the day, the overall numbers mean absolutely nothing, because they vary from from city to city, from neighborhood to neighborhood, of how important it is when you've identified this is the area that I want to buy my next home in, and how important it is to say, okay, let's take a look at the activity numbers now for that specific neighborhood, because it may not be a clear indication or a reflection of what the overall numbers look like, because the overall MLS numbers are the overall numbers. But if you've selected, for instance, Palm Valley out on the west side, those numbers may be, indicate a stronger buyer's market or stronger seller's market. And you got to be careful when you're buying a home. You got to be working with someone who's going to dive into those numbers specifically.
Right. Case in point, sat down with a wonderful gal last week, and we were discussing what her portfolio looks like, and she has a couple of properties that are there. There's a lot of inventory. The days on market for the stuff that is selling is 75 to 90 days. So let's just call it average 82. And so we sat there and I said, hey, look, let's just keep these bad boys as a rental right now, because I'm not feeling like we're in a great position to get full retail value or get what you want out of this bad boy, because her intent was to sell those and then do a 1031 on something something different. And when I'm seeing stuff like that, I'm thinking, you know what? Let's wait till the next uptick, because I do think that it doesn't make sense for a lot of sellers to sell right now. And I do think that we are in more buy mode right now because of the way it's trending, even though the overall numbers are saying that it's still somewhat of a seller's market on the average. I'm still maintaining that right now is a better time to buy than it is to sell. And you might say, well, Ryan, even when the numbers were staggering with 3,200, 3,800 homes for sale, you were saying to still buy then too. And the caveat was always, buy correctly. We're not going to spend a bunch above appraisal value. We're not going to give away the farm. We're not going to waive inspections. We're not going to do those types of things. But if we find a good deal that works for our portfolio, then it makes all the sense in the world. Why? Because we were getting money for practically free then. And so that was a massive compensating factor that we had to take into account, whereas now interest rates aren't as solid as they were. Yes, they're better than what they were a year ago, but they weren't what they were 4 years ago. So we just had to take that into stride and take that into account when we were deciding whether or not we were going to be a buyer or a seller or both on that market and on the market today.
Well, Jess, it always just comes down to, how do the numbers work? And people ask me all the time, is it a good time to buy? And I always start with, well, what's your motivation? Because it may not be a good time to buy for one person, but depending on the situation, might be a great time to buy for another person. But the numbers always matter. It's not. I don't think you can make a blanket statement saying it's not a good time to buy and it's not a good time to sell. It just depends on the numbers. It depends on the areas, and it depends on just all the different aspects to that particular person's situation.
And I agree with it depends on the trends too. I think the trends was a good point that Ryan made earlier.
Dude, you're just on fire today, Ryan.
And that was a very good point right there, because the trends in the market really play a role in what's happening. We may have a good amount of inventory, but the trend of, hey, it's more of a buyer atmosphere, but it also depends on the neighborhood. We've seen the neighborhoods where it's extremely attractive and you can get more than what you're expecting to get, but you see those neighborhoods out there where properties are just sitting and like nobody's even coming into the neighborhood to look at it, and it seems like it's priced right, but that's the trend of the neighborhood. So I feel like that's a solid point too, and I feel like making sure that you have the right person on your corner, knowing what those trends are, is a big deal.
All right, well, there you have it. If you are looking for more a deeper dive into the inventory numbers and what they mean specifically for you, and if you're looking at a specific area and you really want a clear understanding of what those numbers look like, go ahead and break out your phone and text the word homes to 623-AZ-RECON. That's homes to 623-AZ-RECON.